Hi, I'm Carol Rothman, author of Wooden Bowls from the Scroll Saw. Before I became a woodworker, I was a cake decorator and also did a lot of baking. So on a recent trip to my publisher, Fox Chapel Publishing, I brought along a large batch of biscotti to thank the nice people who had been so helpful to me. The biscotti were, if anything, a bigger hit than my bowls. And I promised them that since they're too far for me to regularly supply them, I would shoot a video on how to make them. Many people shy away from doing home baking. It sounds very, very complicated. Well, if you're tired of spending $15 a pound at fancy bakeries for cookies that are mediocre, bite the bullet, or the almond, and learn to make your own. I'm going to do it without a mixer, using only a whisk and a wooden spoon, and you'll see how easy it is. You won't be able to stop yourself from rushing to try to make it. They're also, my oven is ready. That beep says that my oven is ready. The first step, obviously, is to preheat the oven. I preheat that to 350 degrees because it will take so little time to throw these together that by the time they're ready, usually the oven has just preheated. Now, the cookies consist of several parts. There are the dry ingredients that are going to get whisked together first. There are the wet ingredients, which are my extracts, vanilla and almond, and 3 eggs. And then the add-ins. This is the creative fun part. And I'm going to make a variation of the classic almond biscotti, a variation using sesame seeds and raisins, mainly because I happen to like sesame seeds and raisins. And one of the really thin cookies that are out on the market sell for something like $3 for a little package that weighs maybe 2 ounces. So I tried to replicate it, and I did a pretty good job on the taste. So the first thing we're going to do is to mix the dry ingredients. I'm using an oversized bowl because it's easier if you don't want to get flour all over the kitchen. And I'm going to take my flour. And this is not a fussy recipe. You don't need to sift the flour, but I like to give it a stir before I start in case it's gotten really compacted. And I need 2 cups of flour. I'm not going to wrap this on anything. That would pack it down, so I just scoop it and add it to the bowl. Do this again. And that's the flour. Now we're going to add the sugar, and this recipe uses 2/3 of a cup of sugar. So I go into my slightly lumpy but not bad lumps sugar container and put in 2/3 of a cup of sugar. If you can break the lumps up with your finger, clean hands, then the sugar is quite usable. If you can't break it up, then sieve the sugar or get some more sugar, because you'll only get hard little lumps. Alright, now we need leavening. I'm going to use a teaspoon of baking powder in this neat jar that has a little lip here that you can use. The leavening you try to be pretty careful about because you don't want it too puffy, you don't want it too dense. So that's a teaspoon of baking powder. And as I use my ingredients, I like to put them off to the side. Notice I've assembled them all for a start. This is a good insurance policy against forgetting something. Alright, now we're going to add a little salt, about a 1/4 teaspoon or so. You can leave out the salt if you really want to keep it very, very healthful, but I like to add a little bit. It increases the flavor. Alright, now, you sometimes get instructions to sift together the dry ingredients. Wrong. Sifting the dry ingredients does not mix them thoroughly. Whisking does. You can see this very clearly if you have a colored ingredient like cinnamon in there, or cocoa, and as you whisk it, you'll see it gradually distributes itself. It's also quick and easy. If you don't have a whisk, you should get one. It's pretty basic cooking stuff. Alright, so now our dry ingredients are ready. Now we do the wet ingredients. 3 eggs. Now, I came across this very neat tip in one of the assorted cookbooks that I own about breaking eggs on their side. I'm not quite sure why, but when you do it that way, you do not get pieces of shell. Even though it's sort of messy, the shell kind of holds together. Alright, so we've got our 3 eggs. Now I'm going to just wash my hands because I don't like having egg white on there, so I'll be back in a moment when my hands are clean. Alright, now I'm going to add my extracts. I like to shake up my vanilla. It's Madagascan vanilla. It's a nice quality vanilla because you tend to get a residue at the bottom. I like to keep it all the flavor together. Alright, 1 teaspoon of vanilla. If you get a little more, a little less, it's not a big deal. You can live dangerously with vanilla. It's not like salt or the leavening. Almond extract tends to be more potent, so we're only going to use a ½ teaspoon of that. It smells lovely, lasts a long time. Alright, so these are my wets. And since it's a small bowl and I have a big whisk, I'm just going to mix these together. Okay? Now I'm going to add my wets to the dries. If you want to use a mixer, you can mix up the dries in a mixer and then gently add these. You don't want to beat the life out of it because that will toughen things. And just mix it together until the flour disappears. Alright, so now we have our dough pretty well mixed. Now we have to do the add-in part. Now, I've prepared my almonds by toasting them. It's about 3/4 of a cup of almonds. I do a little extra, which allows for nibbling. And one of the tricks in keeping a cookie lower calorie is to cut up caloric ingredients like nuts so that the parts disperse themselves better. Otherwise, you're going to either have to use a lot of nuts or you're going to have parts that have nuts in them and parts that don't. If you don't like almonds, you can toast some hazelnuts and use those instead. Alright, so also, if you're going to cut up ingredients for cakes and cookies, use a special cutting board. This cutting board does not see onions, garlic, or anything except things that are meant to go into cakes and cookies. You don't want garlic flavored biscotti, unless you want to make a savory biscotti, and that's not what we're doing now. Alright, in go the raisins. Dark or light raisins, about ½ a cup, and a cup of sesame seeds. I'm sorry, ½ a cup of sesame seeds. Could use a cup, but that might be a little bit too much. Notice that the add-ins are sort of arbitrary depending on your taste, and you can use either the hulled or unhulled sesame seeds depending on availability. Right, now, since this is getting to be a little hard to mix, what I'm going to do is to use my hand. Hands are wonderful tools for baking. It lets you feel what's going on. You're getting in the last bits of any unincorporated flour. And you want to get everything mixed in nicely so when you form your cookies, all the cookies will have about the same amount of these nice add-ins. Alright, this is starting to look about right. Everything is nicely coated. Notice this is not a fussy recipe. Okay, now, the next step is to take this dough and form it into our biscotti. So in order to do that, let me clear the table so we'll have a nice clear place to work.